Welcome to Masters of Product Management, powered by Sequent Learning Networks, a show that provides extraordinary insights for product managers who want to go faster and farther in their product management careers.
Hello, this is JJ Rory, Vice President at Sequent Learning Networks. In our Masters of Product Management podcast, we tap into the experiences of people who work in and around product management to help you learn and grow in your product management career. Probably the most significant aspect of product management is the ability to gather feedback from customers and use that feedback to uncover core needs. While I think we all understand the importance of this activity, frankly, most organizations don't do it very well. Generally speaking, business to consumer or B2C companies seem to have figured it out a little better than most business to business or B2B companies. While there may be myriad reasons for that, there is a lot to be learned from voice of customer mechanisms employed by many B2C organizations. Our guest today brings a unique perspective to the discussion because she has led product at leading B2C companies such as eBay and Shutterfly, as well as B2B organizations such as NetSuite and JobVite. Rebecca Nathanson is currently the Senior Director of Product Management at JobVite. She started working in product management over 20 years ago, spending some time fumbling her way through the role at startups with 1 or 2 PMs early in her career, then moving into larger organizations where she could both learn and teach over the past 15 years or so. She's done technology replatforming, A/B testing introduction, process transformation, and UI redesigns. And one of the themes that has stayed consistent, regardless of the work or the industry, has been the importance of staying connected to both the customer and the user. And in B2B, that's not always the same person. So thank you so much for joining me today, Rebecca.
It's great to be here.
So tell us, what was one of the biggest aha moments that you had when you moved from B2C to B2B product management?
Well, it started off as a bit of a what the heck moment the first couple of months, and followed by a series of aha moments, thank goodness. One of the biggest changes for me was that I suddenly had a sales team in the mix, which makes it a whole lot more complex in a lot of ways, because there's both the sales team and the buyer relationship, but it's also immensely helpful in that great salespeople can really distill needs across dozens of opportunities and dozens of customers, whether they're lost opportunities that point to key product gaps or to renewal opportunities that point to pain points daily users experience. But I also had to understand that the buyer and the user aren't the same person, and that the salesperson may not even quite know how different they are, or sometimes even which one they're talking to, if they're talking to somebody who really is in control of the buying decision or somebody who's in the system all the time. And learning to identify the different stakeholders, both within the sales and CS orgs, as well as within the customer companies, as well as understanding their varying perspectives, was a really important step in developing an approach that let us create requirements that delivered both on buyer goals as well as user happiness.
Yeah, I think that's a great distinction, and something that folks who've only been in B2C may not understand, that kind of uniqueness of having the sales partnership. While it makes it complex, it also brings a level of understanding and feedback to the role as well. So as you mentioned, the variety of roles within a customer for an enterprise product is far greater than a typical consumer product. So can you share some techniques you use to make sure you're keeping that in mind when you're creating a product?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the most important tools for understanding who you're building for is personas. And that's something that we've always used when I was in consumer. But I think in some ways it may be even more important when you're doing B2B and enterprise, because as you say, the personas vary widely. So first off is that buyer persona. And at JobVite, the go-to-market team actually developed our buyer persona initially with a focus on helping enabling the sales team. So the sales team understands who they're talking to. But then the product team fleshed it out for our own needs, because obviously we need more detail in certain ways. that buyer interacts with the product during the sales cycle, but they often barely use it once it's purchased and configured, which means that you're really building for the buyer persona from a demo and RFP perspective, more so than from a functionality perspective. But if you lose track of the needs of that persona, it really doesn't matter how great the end product is. You'll never get a chance for people to use it because your sales team won't be able to make the sale. And so next you come to the actual user personas, the people who are in the product. And in any type of complex software, at a minimum, you're going to have admins or super user type of people, as well as daily users. And typically you're going to have far more variety in that than that. At NetSuite, commerce users had a completely different view into the system than did accounting users. And at JobVite, the hiring manager's goals in the system are very bit different from recruiters' goals in applicant tracking. And so you need to make sure that you're identifying all of the relevant user personas. And then finally, there's the persona of your customer's customer, which is a whole other kettle of fish. So when you're building enterprise software that's ultimately used by consumers, whether it's a career website, an e-commerce website, you have an additional tier of persona to manage and keep in mind. So with all of these personas swirling around, one of the first things we do in kicking off a project is to identify which persona is primary. Other personas may be interacting with your feature or your product, but you need to know which type of user you're building for, or you'll end up exposing way too much configuration complexity to someone who doesn't use the system enough to understand it, or showing a lovely graph to someone who dreams in spreadsheets and never wants to see visual representations of anything anytime. And so then finally, we also think about specifically those super users, those admins. How will personas handle configuration and implementation? And that, there's that difference between the admin who does a lot of configuration and the user who sees the end result. And the interesting wrinkle for this one is that thinking in this way has actually made us start thinking of our professional services teams internal to JobVite as an additional persona, because they're doing a lot of the configuration for the more complex implementations, which means that we end up with an additional layer of persona that is within our own company.
Oh, wow. That's fascinating. And such great advice. I mean, I can't agree with you enough in terms of using personas. And you've laid out a perfect example of how important they are, but also how complex and the number of personas you need and the reason they're important to begin with. So to tag on to that a little bit, and you touched on this briefly as well. As you know, I spend a lot of time with B2B companies and help them understand that while their direct customer may be another business, that business has customers too, of course. And those customers may be businesses or they may be consumers. So for B2B companies, there are often these layers of customers, right, from which feedback is needed. Any advice on how to navigate those various external customer layers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, we already talked about there's layers between the buyer and decision maker and the actual system user. But beyond that, the best way to understand your customers is to first deeply understand your customer themselves. So when we visit a customer, the first thing we ask is for the customer to describe their business and the key concerns they have in accomplishing their goals. So in the case of JobVite, we're focused on recruiting, which means we may hear that our customers are worried about attracting enough candidates, or they care deeply about giving candidates a great impression from the first moment they encounter the brand all the way through the day they start the job. And so once you understand intellectually what the full set of users and customers looks like, then you need to really internalize it. And so we already talked about personas as one of the key areas that you focus on there. And I think one of the things that I want to reiterate there is that you have to make sure you're not just creating the personas, but you're using them. And sometimes that means explicitly deciding that one persona is more important for a given feature than another, and that you are maybe going to make another persona who is not your focus a little bit less happy in order to deliver on the key promise and premise of the feature that you're building. You need to make sure you make that decision consciously rather than through any kind of omission or neglect.
That's perfect advice. As you know, product management is just a series of decisions, right? That are made daily, that are made monthly, annually, et cetera. And these combinations of decisions end up with being a good product or sometimes not so good. That's a good example of using data, sometimes quantifiable data, sometimes anecdotal data, but using data and being intentional in your decision. So thank you for sharing that. So as I said earlier, you bring a very unique perspective, and I've enjoyed getting to know you and hearing about your background because you've been in both B2C and B2B. And sometimes product managers tend to stay in one arena or the other. So I like the balance of your background. So what are some areas that you believe B2B organizations can learn from B2C companies in the context of customer feedback and uncovering needs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so B2B companies generally have a great heritage of paying attention to users. At both eBay and Shutterfly, we did usability testing and home visits on a regular basis, both for specific projects as well as for general learning. There's no specific idea of, a project you're trying to implement. You're just trying to learn more about your customers. And too often, B2B companies don't develop that same habit because they're focusing, again, as we talked about, on the buyer to the exclusion of the user. Some companies do it the other way around, but I think generally those companies are out of business pretty quickly. You need to focus on both. And B2C companies also have a big advantage in that beyond the qualitative techniques, their quantitative techniques uncover information about both user and buyer needs since they're frequently the same person. And so tools like Pendo, Google Analytics, et cetera, can provide great insights for large masses of users. And that complements the qualitative learnings that you get from home visits and usability testing. B2B companies, especially I think at the enterprise level, struggle to gain statistically valid data through user analysis. And one of the big reasons is that when you're working in the enterprise, your list of customers is smaller. And so therefore gaining the statistically valid information via pure quantitative analysis, you'd need to run a test or do analysis for a much longer period of time to get the information. At eBay, we used to sometimes literally run tests for 15 minutes and then turn the test off and have enough data to have a statistically valid answer. So at JobVite, we do have some of these challenges. We've got a large customer base, but not always large enough. And so we use a few techniques from B2C culture to gain customer insight. We do use Pendo, and it gives us great information about users. So that helps us understand where there's friction, what the key paths are, that sort of thing. It helps us understand where we need to focus our usability efforts, but it doesn't necessarily give us the kind of strategic insights we need to make big prioritization decisions. And for that, we really tend to focus more on the qualitative side. We need conversations, and we have multiple ways that we have those conversations. So first, like a lot of B2B companies, we have a customer advisory board. And a CAB can be incredibly helpful for a product org, or it can be completely useless. It's useless if all you do is present your roadmap, show them some mock-ups for a key project, take a few questions, and then you leave. The real insight comes when you bring ideas and questions rather than a finished product to the CAB. Last year, we spent hours with our CAB members discussing one of our next projects before we had any mock-ups or really much in the way of planned features. We just spent time working through questions about their needs and pain points, and we got really wonderful insights to help shape the direction of the project going forward. Once we really kick off a project, we also engage customers as design partners, and we get a commitment from usually 3 to 5 customers to come along with us in our design journey, starting with purely generative research, again, no mock-ups, just questions, moving through rough mocks all the way into interactive prototypes and getting feedback from them every step of the way. So these customers need to commit to multiple hour plus meetings with us to provide the feedback, but they in turn know that they're able to guide the feature based on their needs. And we've never had trouble getting customers to commit to this time because they get very excited about the opportunity to shape the feature.
Yeah, I found the same thing. I think that sometimes, especially B2B companies, become timid about asking customers to participate in this type of feedback. And I, like you, have never found a customer that wasn't willing to do it. And so, again,
thrilled, usually.
Yeah, absolutely, they love to be part of it and drive the strategy and the future of something that's helping their business. So, I mean, why wouldn't they, right? The other thing that I'll add to your comments, which were great, by the way, is I've found that there's what I coin is a level of hubris of B2B product managers. And it's not intentional by any stretch. It's just that often they have such a domain knowledge of the industry and of clients. And oftentimes product managers in B2B organizations have been in the customer seat themselves and then move to a vendor role. And what happens is that hubris, as I coined it, is it gets in the way of taking the blinders off and believing that you know the answers before you ask the question. Right. And so what product managers and how I coach product managers is, pretend as if you are new to this industry, you are new to this customer. And I don't mean, not understanding their business, but go in and ask the questions as if you would, not believing you have the answer in your back pocket. It's the only way that you're ever going to actually have them provide you feedback and your ears be open enough and your eyes be open enough to gather that feedback. And so again, I agree with everything you said. And sometimes it's this subconscious arrogance that we bring just simply because we've been there, done that for so long in an industry, and product managers sometimes need to get away from that.
Yeah, and I think that one of the other things I've seen with that is I think some product managers are worried about being seen as clueless or dumb if they ask these questions as if they're brand new. But the customers so appreciate being treated as the authorities and the experts that they are, that's never how they interpret these questions, which sometimes feel very basic to the product manager.
Yeah, that is a great point. And that is one of the reasons not only they use that domain knowledge, but as you said, that's exactly right. They try to be the expert because they think that's going to help the conversation. They think the client will look at them in a better light. But to your point, we're still trying to learn every day what and how our product can help our customers better. So final question, and I'm excited to hear you talk about this because I know you at JobBite do a great job there. One of the most important ways to uncover needs and truly understand a customer's world is through observation, which means literally spending time with clients in their offices, in the field, et cetera, and just observing them going about their daily business. And too few organizations place an emphasis on this in my experience. But I know that JobBite does. So can you share with us some details about that program?
Yeah, so this year we introduced a customer visit program for the entire R&D team. And we work with our account reps to schedule 2 to 3 customer visits a month. And we have had no trouble getting those account reps to get these visits on the calendar. It's, wonderful cadence of them just popping up and we figure out who's going to attend. And the goal of the visit is to get out of the conference room and step away from PowerPoint. We don't want the visit to be all of us sitting around a conference table and looking at a PowerPoint presentation of their list of grievances. An ideal visit for us is when we sit with the users at their desks and watch them use JobVite and the other tools that they use in their day-to-day jobs. So we'll set aside time for them to review their requests and pain points, but the real gold comes when you're seeing someone in their day-to-day environment. So you learn about how they use all the tools, Excel, email, chat, paper, beyond just the software that you build. At a recent customer visit, I actually saw a couple of Post-it notes on the bottom of a recruiter's monitor that were reminders for how to accomplish specific tasks in JobVite. And those Post-its told me that particular area was confusing to her and merited some additional analysis around discoverability of those features. And so I never would have learned that just having a conversation with her in the conference room. The other key of the customer visit, and this is hugely important, is that it's not just for product managers. We make sure that software engineers, quality engineers, product marketing, user experience, of course, attend as well. And it's really wonderful to see how enlightening that first customer visit is to an engineer. Engineers usually interact with the software they build in test environments that don't really reflect how a customer uses the system. The data is funny, the configurations are always changing as they test them out. And so they don't have a deep understanding of a customer's day-to-day life in the software. And their eyes are really open when they see the product they build in the wild. And so I love seeing engineers on their first customer visits, and the debrief afterwards is always just wonderful.
I actually just had somewhat of an aha moment myself. I spend a lot of time telling product managers not to only rely on feedback from the sales group. Take the feedback, of course, because it's important, but it's hearsay. And it's, one step removed from the client, and the product manager needs to get in front of that client, observe and listen and ask questions themselves. And your last point there is a good example of, it's not just about the product managers hearing and seeing the client. It's the entire cross-functional ecosystem, which is the designers and the engineers. And, we as product managers are thought of and expected to be the translators of customer speak and kind of being the conduit. But just as I preach not to let sales be the only feedback mechanism and not just rely on hearsay, same thing goes with engineering and design, et cetera. Don't just rely on the hearsay of the product manager, actually get in there and see it for yourself. So that was a great piece of advice. I love that.
Yeah, I love the way you couch that. That makes a huge amount of sense.
So, wow, this has been such a great talk today. Thank you so much, Rebecca Nathanson, Senior Director of Product Management for JobVite, for sharing your wisdom and experiences. Great examples. There's much of product management that remains the same regardless of industry or product or type of customer. But you've shown us that there is much to be learned from other organizations in terms of customer feedback. So thank you again so much for joining me.
I had a great time. Thank you very much.
So thank you all for joining us on Masters of Product Management, powered by Sequent Learning Networks. I am JJ Rory, and I look forward to speaking with you on the next episode.
You've been listening to Masters of Product Management, powered by Sequent Learning Networks. If you'd like to take your career to the next level with additional tools, training, coaching, and books, be sure to visit Sequent Learning Networks at sequentlearning.com.